All right, Exodus 22, let's call this one trust, because that is literally going to come out of verse 9 of chapter 22, where it reads, "For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox, for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing of which one says, 'This is it,' the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor." Basically describing for us at least one of three ways that trust can be violated. And we'll probably talk about more, but the three I want to focus on are specifically outright theft, and beyond outright theft, negligence. And then, as we've already talked about, things that have been entrusted to a person that are either lost or stolen or damaged in some way. And so the outright theft is going to be something we see discussed between verses 1 and roughly verse 4. The negligence is going to extend from verses 5 through 6, and then the breach of trust literally from verses 7 on through about verse 15. But they are also going to introduce a section called, in the ESV at least, laws about social justice, which is a hot button term now. But I think we've lost touch with the way that that concept of social justice extends directly from the text of the Bible, or at least the heading about this section, which actually deals with the ways in which the nation of Israel is to treat foreigners, widows, the fatherless, and the poor. And so ultimately, in summing up the attitude towards sojourners, which in a lot of ways sums up all of these rules, verse 21 is going to say, "You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." And what that is reminding us of is something that Jesus is going to emphasize at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in a relatively famous passage that simply reads in chapter 7 of Matthew, verse 12, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." So as we see the opening of the law, when Jesus summarizes it, he uses a principle very similar to, look, you were slaves. Understand what it's like to be on the bottom, and understand why God has created this nation out of a nation of rich men that he filtered through the pain of slavery, now to create them as a nation, establishing their legal system, pointing back to not their wealth, but their difficulty under difficult oppression. And so understand what he's saying going forward when Jesus is summarizing these principles. He's saying, understand what you would want it to be, or how you would want to be treated in the perspective of a person that might be easy to look over or look down on. And that's what you need to do when you're trying to interpret, okay, well, what should I literally do with this legal principle that I see? Because the temptation can be, when the principle seems to cost us too much, to twist it and look at it from a perspective that makes it easy for us to simply do nothing. But understand, this whole concept of restitution talks about the ways in which we can't really reestablish trust until we embrace our obligation to fully make amends for the things that we've done. And so understand, in this oops, I'm sorry time, that oops, I'm sorry leaves something left to be desired in trust. And so when we look at times when we can wonder, what's happened to trust? Why do people not trust anyone anymore? It can be a byproduct of something we mentioned before. The rise of grace preaches a heavy dose of, there's nothing I can do, when the Bible is talking about, if you're honest, you know that there's some things that you can do. And it can be easier to preach a heavy dose of grace when the alternative is simply looking back to the ways that the Bible has specifically said that this is how you make a person whole. And so to the degree that we stop using grace as a shield for taking responsibility for things that we know that we can do to help make amends, we can probably begin to make steps forward to restoring so much of the trust that now seems to be so rare.